Gold bars and cash worth more than 80 million US dollars are at the center of the latest spat between Hungary and Ukraine. Hungarian authorities seized the contents of a Ukrainian state bank convoy that was making its way home from Austria. The assets are still being held. Hungary says it's investigating what it calls money laundering. Ukraine's president has hit back with some allegations of his own.
What should we call what happened with the Oshad cash convoy in Hungary? I think the term banditry describes it very well. That is what it was about. As for partners, I've talked with many of them, and I repeat officially, publicly, what I told many of our friends. Europe needs to do one thing today, not remain silent.
Our correspondent Ferenc Gaal has been covering this story and joins us now from Brussels. Ferenc, Ukraine's state bank says that the movement of the cash and gold across Hungary was just a regular bank transport. Hungarian authorities are saying it could be money laundering overseen by a former Ukrainian intelligence official. What exactly is going on here?
Yeah, I think that is something that a lot of people might have been wondering who've been following this story. Which is quite an extraordinary one. So exactly a week ago, Hungary stopped these cash transports, detained some Ukrainian nationals, and took the cars and their contents, which was several millions in US dollars and 9 kilograms of gold. So, as you said, Ukraine maintains this was a regular transport. People with knowledge of the banking sector say this is actually something that has been happening on a weekly basis, going from Austria to Ukraine via Hungary. The Hungarian authorities have claimed there have been suspicions of money laundering. It is not clear what exactly this could be. Now, what we know now is that the detained Ukrainian nationals have been released and expelled from Hungary. Hungary has even returned the vans to the Ukrainian bank, but it has kept the assets within those vans. So, millions of dollars, millions of euros, some kilograms of gold. And from the beginning, there has been a lot of doubt what the actual legal basis is for Hungary keeping these assets.
Well, this case is still being investigated, understandably, in Hungary. Meanwhile, Hungary's ruling Fidesz party rushed a bill through parliament at the beginning of this week legitimizing the seizure of the Ukrainian assets. What are we to make of that?
Yes, exactly. So this is a draft law that has been really pushed through the Security Council and Parliament within less than 2 days. As the ruling Fidesz parliamentary group said, there is urgency. And it is really seen as a law that is it mentions specifically this case of this Ukrainian cash transporter. And I spoke to some legal experts, and there is a lot of skepticism, to say the least, whether this is in keeping with, standards of rule of law. Because first, it's quite unusual for a law to be targeting a specific incident. Like, laws are meant to be general. This one is clearly meant to aim at one specific case, this Ukrainian cash transporter. The other issue that a lot of legal experts have is that it appears that this law is creating a legal basis for something that has happened in the past, which is also very unusual and not really how law works, right? Like, something happens and there is no law against it. You can't create a law afterwards, but a lot of critics say this is exactly what Hungary is doing here, legitimizing past actions by this new law. So it's really been seen very critically. It's not yet signed by the president, but it is unlikely that there will be any issues there. And in any case, the prime minister has already signed a government decree with the same effect as well, which is already in effect.
Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, is furious. He says the seizure of the cash and gold amounts to banditry and that Ukraine is threatening sanctions in retaliation. What does this case tell us, Ferenc, about relations between Ukraine and Hungary?
Well, relations between these two neighboring countries are really extremely tense, and it almost seems like we're witnessing a new low almost every day these days. And the Hungarian government does not look like the actions they're taking are, doing much to kind of alleviate this tension or dial down the conflict the rhetoric towards Ukraine. Apart from the bill that has been passed in connection with the cash transport, there was another piece of legislation passed in Parliament that objected or rejected support for Ukraine, rejected the EU accession of Ukraine. So the government is really homing in on Ukraine as their main opponent, or you could almost say enemy, in their public communication and even in legislation. And at the same time, of course, there have been just yesterday also very clear comments from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy saying that he considers Hungary to be an ally of Russia, and Viktor Orban's government to be supporting Russia with anything sort of missiles and soldiers. So, yeah, clearly tensions between these two countries are at a high point.
You have contacted the European Commission to get their take on the seizure of Ukrainian assets by Hungary. What do they say?
Yeah, the Commission didn't really comment on this case, and obviously, to comment on a legal document, they need to review it thoroughly before making any statement that could have wide-ranging implications. But at the same time, this, lack of comment on it also fits into a perception that many here in Brussels have, and that has been reported on before, which is that the Commission is really trying to avoid any confrontation with the Hungarian government right now. And this is simply because they do not want to be seen in any way to be interfering with this election. They do not want to give Viktor Orban more ammunition in his campaign that is really also heavily building on anti-EU narratives. So they are really trying to, avoid confrontation with the Hungarian government right now. And there has also been some criticism regarding that.
Now, Hungary's seizure of Ukrainian assets is happening in the middle of a huge dispute between the two countries about the disruption of the Russian oil supply to Hungary through a pipeline in Ukraine. Now, that pipeline was damaged, apparently in a Russian airstrike, and Hungary accuses Ukraine of dragging its feet in getting the pipeline repaired. Are these two stories related?
Well, you could be forgiven in thinking that they are not, but it seems very hard to separate them at this point, especially because even Hungarian government members have made statements to the effect that it is no coincidence that the cash transporter was seized in the context of, no Russian oil coming through the Druzhba pipeline. So at this point, really, it is very hard to separate any issue of bilateral relations between Hungary and Ukraine from the Druzhba pipeline, which Hungary claims is being blockaded by Ukraine. Ukraine, of course, as you said, is referring to damage by Russian attacks. And it has just been ongoing for weeks now, and it's unclear what and when we will have a solution in this conflict.
Well, as we've mentioned, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban maintains friendly relations with the Kremlin, and he has elections coming up in a few weeks. Today, his government said they will declassify a national security report, which they say proves that Orban's main political challenger is receiving funding from Ukraine. How much is the topic of Ukraine overshadowing the run-up to the election in Hungary?
It is really the topic of this campaign, especially in the governing party's communication. They are really hammering home this narrative that Ukraine is a threat to Hungary, to all Hungarians, and recently even especially specifically to the person of Viktor Orban and his family. You have videos that Viktor Orban has posted where he presumably is making calls to family members saying that they should not worry about the Ukrainian threats. And this type of content really is also interesting because it shows you how facts and misleading statements are being blended in this campaign. Because on the one hand, yes, there was a statement recently by Ukrainian President Zelenskyy where he seemed to threaten Orban, which was clearly condemned also on the EU level. On the other hand, there have been the Hungarian government has been alluding to statements made by a former Ukrainian politician who has no role in the current government, who has also made some threatening statements to Orban. So all this is being blended together in this overarching narrative that Ukraine is the threat to Hungary. And clearly, Fidesz is hoping that this will motivate voters to vote for them in April.
Ferenc, thank you very much for helping us unwind that. DW's Ferenc Gaal in Brussels.